All right, now we're in Fall 18 tutorial video number 2. And we're picking up where we left off. The last video ended when we were talking about average and standard deviation. We can execute these as functions, okay? Instead of summing all of the individual values and dividing by the number of values, or taking differences and squaring them and then summing them and then dividing by the count and then taking the square root. If you do decide to execute big equations like this, just be very careful of your order of operations. Now, if I want to average something and I actually have 4 concentrations that I want to average over the trials, I don't need to retype the equation for average. Okay, so instead I can actually copy this down. Okay, so I could copy paste, or I could go again to the corner. The hand would move the cell from one place to another, and let me just show you how that works. I could move this up here, and you'll notice it's still referencing the data that I would like it to reference. I'm going to put that back. But if I want to copy it down, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go to the corner. So my cursor is normally a white plus sign. If I go to the corner, it'll be a black plus sign. I'm going to click and hold and then drag that down. And it's going to copy the equation down. Now what you'll notice is that now I'm averaging over the 2.5 times 10 to the minus 5 concentration, the second concentration, instead of the first concentration. Here, again, if you click your cursor into the actual equation at the top, then it'll highlight all of the cells that you're referencing. So here now I'm referencing the third concentration, and then I'm referencing the fourth concentration. I can do that also with standard deviation, and I'm probably actually going to want to decrease the number of sig figs that I have here. Okay. So now I have all my averages and all my standard deviations. What I would like to do with that is use a scatter plot with error bars. Okay, so we're going to make 2 different kinds of plots here. We're going to plot this the way a calibration curve would be plotted. We're also going to make a bar chart, and both of those we're going to put error bars on, and then just see how you can manipulate those charts to make them look pretty, basically. So I want to plot the concentration versus the average absorbance. So here I selected this range, and then I used a command. I have a Mac, so I'm using a command to also select this other range, and I'm going to insert a plot. So up here we have a bunch of different types of plots. Okay. This one right here is the scatter plot, XY scatter plot, so we're going to be using that one. We're also going to be using the column chart. But let's start with the XY scatter plot. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. You can have just the points show up, and we'll mention that most of the plots that you make would be of this kind if you're using a scatter plot. Connecting the dots between scatter plots is typically not necessarily useful or a good representation of the data, but sometimes it will be. So it depends on what you're doing. In this case, we just want to just represent the data points on their own. So the first thing to recognize is what numbers are on what axis. Okay, so what I want is absorbance on the y-axis and concentration on the x-axis, and that's going to make my calibration curve for me. Now if I just look at the numbers, the magnitude of the numbers, then that's exactly what has happened. So typically the second column that you highlight will be the y-axis, the first column that you highlight will be the x-axis. If you highlight them in a different order and it puts them on the wrong axes, then you can change that so that they are on the right axis. Now, how do you do that? How do you change that, or how do you add data or make this look pretty? Okay, so in my window here, at the top, since I have selected the chart, okay, at the top I have chart design, which is just really, do you want it to be colorful? Do you want a lot of indices, how do you want your points to look, and you can edit those individually as well. Okay, I'm going to leave that sort of like that one. But then you can also go to select data, okay, and you can change which data you're doing. You can change which are X and which are Y. So I could just delete this and add my X values if I wanted these to be my X values, etc. Now, what we would like to do is, again, make this chart look good. What you don't want to do, okay, is if for some reason you have a plot that has this type of situation where all your data is very bunched together, okay, so maybe you have something like this where all your data is up here, you have no data in the bottom part of your plot. They don't have to be negative numbers. I'm just saying if all your data is crunched into one part of the plot, you want to make sure that you zoom in. And so how am I doing this? If I go to format, okay, or chart type, I think you can just double click on your chart here and you have a bunch of format chart options. Okay, so here where you've got measurements, size and properties, okay, height, width, scale, your height, changing actually just how big that is. Chart options, you can fill. Do I want a border behind, you want a fill of a color behind there so you can make that look different. We've got colors that are, let's just say, that's going to make it look like that in the background. I'm just going to keep this as white in the background. If I double click on an axis, right, that's how I got this format axis menu. And now this axis options are going to allow me to change the scale. Okay, so if I want to make sure it just goes between 0 and 1.2 or 0 to 1 or however I want to do that, you should make sure that your data fills the actual plot that you're doing here. Now I've got major grid lines and minor grid lines. I'm not showing the minor grid lines. I'm only showing the major ones, but I could make this 0.5, right, so that there's fewer lines and fewer numbers here on this axis. I think 0.2 was a good one. If I had 0.1, it would be probably too many, right? It would start to get busy looking. So I'm going to go back to 0.2. You can also change where the horizontal axis crosses. So do you want the horizontal axis to cross at 0, or do you want it to cross at the top, right? If you want all your x-axis values to be at the top, or do you want to make it cross at a specific value like 0.5, right? You could do that if that's something that makes sense, okay? I'm just going to have this be automatic and have it cross at the bottom. You can display units. So if there's a lot of zeros in front of here, or there's a lot of zeros afterwards, you could put it in hundreds and thousands or trillions and billions or whatever you'd like. Right now, most likely you won't have to do any of those things. You could change this to a logarithmic scale, which may not necessarily be very interesting, and so we'll undo that. But we need to then make sure that my minimum is 0. There we go. Okay, tick marks, again, you can change all the formatting to any of these things. Where do you want these axis, etc.? Okay, you can see here that these numbers are all squished on top of each other, and so there's two ways to do that. I'm going to click on that one so that I can change what that one looks like. I can change the label position, so it's at the top or at the bottom, or any next to the axis. I can change the notation, right? So this could be a number, in which case I'm not going to be able to see anything. We chose scientific notation earlier to make sure that that would work out. And you can change the number of decimal places that are going to be shown here, okay? All right. You can also, let's see, this is for the text, right? I've got vertical alignment in the middle. I want my text direction to be perhaps rotated. Okay, so they're sideways so that maybe I could read them all that way. But you could also do a custom angle, okay? And maybe this is 45 degrees. or maybe this is whatever 45 plus 90 is, right? 100 and 135. Oh, less than or equal to 90. So I guess 45 is fine. So that you can actually read all that text if you need all the numbers to be there. If you don't need all the numbers to be there, then you can instead go ahead and change this major division so that maybe it's 2 times 10 to the minus 5. And now you don't need to have this custom angle, right, in order to read all the values. Any plot that you make should also include axis titles so that you know what those titles are. So over here we can add chart elements. So you can add axes. You already have axes. You can add axis titles. So I'm going to add a primary horizontal title and also a vertical title, and then I can just double click in here and change this. This is going to be concentration, okay, in molarity. And here I can change this title so that this is absorbance. So now I know what that is. You can have a chart title. Now, especially if you're going to be putting this into a lab report, you should definitely have a chart title. So this is going to be methylene blue calibration curve, okay. And you can change all of these text options. What do they look like? Is it bold? Is there a shadow? What's the alignment? You can change all of that stuff too, just like you can in any other text editor. Let's look here. I want to change this back because this is just, there we go. Okay. So I've got those things. You can also add a legend. Okay, so if you have a few data sets, then you might want to have a legend on the side that'll tell you the name of the series. If you need to change what that name is, I think it'll just say series 1, series 2, etc. But you can go back to this select data window and say, methylene blue, calibration. Maybe I have multiple calibrations, maybe I have different conditions, but they'll all show up and it'll tell you which is which. Now, the last thing that we need to talk about for these plots is to add error bars to this plot. So we can go back to this add chart element situation and go to error bars, okay? And you don't want any of these standard options, okay? You want to go to more error bar options so that you can add your own. You want a plus and a minus error bar. Make sure you have a cap on the end. It just makes it easier to see. And you can see that it just added these random ones that are huge, so it just blew up our scale there. We don't want a fixed value. We don't want a percentage or a standard deviation because this isn't referencing our standard deviations, okay? We want to use a custom value and use our standard deviations, right? When you read an average and a standard deviation, it is 0.3243 plus or minus 0.01, right? So I want to add a custom value where the positive error value is my standard deviation range, okay? And the negative error value is also the standard deviation range. So I select OK. It'll reformat my things. I don't want these X versions. I just want the Y. Okay, and actually it's really hard to see where those show up because the error in these measurements is very tiny.